Let's add a custom recipe type to Minecraft. Forging Fabric courses with advanced topics such as entities, custom structures, and 3D armor models linked in the description below. Alright friends, I'm back in IntelliJ once more, and in this tutorial we're going to be adding a custom recipe type and custom recipe serialization to Minecraft. Now this is sort of the second part of the block entity series, so to speak, the two-parter. What we're basically going to do is the block entity, right? We've defined the crafting pretty much all in code. Really not that great to do it, right? It's a little crude here to do it like this. And what we want to do is we want to be able to make JSON files just like we've seen with other recipes. So, with this recipe here, for example, it was very easy to define, and those types of recipes we're going to be able to make for our custom block entity as well, which is just going to be absolutely freaking amazing. Now this will require quite a few things. So first of all, in the tutorial mod package, we're going to make a new package called recipe, and in here we'll need two new classes. One of them is the mod recipes class, and the second one is then our actual recipe, which is going to be called the Mithril Blaster recipe. There you go. And this will implement the recipe, this one right here from Minecraft recipe, angle brackets, simple inventory. There you go. And we'll hover over this, implement methods. As you can see, quite a few methods, and that should be pretty much it. As you can see, there are quite a few methods. Now, all of them are actually quite straightforward. Everything here is, like always, available to you in the description below. Get a repository and individual just as well, and I will be copying over some stuff here as well. So first of all, we'll copy over both the constructor and the different fields right here. You can see this is just the fields, right? We just have an identifier ID, we have an item stack, which is the actual output, and then a defaulted list of ingredients, which are the recipe items. So the matches method here is probably the most important one. We're going to figure this one out in just a moment. And then the craft method, very straightforward. We just want to return the output here. The fits method, we just want to return true. The get output here, we just want to return output. Crazy enough. Actually, we want to do output.copy, and then in the ID here, we just return ID. In the serializer and the type, those are going to be interesting because we're actually going to have two static classes in just a moment. So before we actually return something here, we actually need to implement those classes. So I will once again copy this over. This is quite a bit, but I will explain a best of my ability. So this is basically the rest of the class. We should get no errors here. And you can see we first of all have a type, which is just a recipe type of this particular recipe, with an instance and an ID. So as you can see, that's pretty much all of it. This, and then in here with the recipe type, we can just return type.instance and everyone is happy. The serializer is a little bit more complicated because this is actually the brains which reads in the JSON file. So this one right here, right, this mithril_blast, this ID is important because this basically is what is defined right here in the type, right? This is going to be tutorial mod, : and then whatever we put into here. So keep that in mind as well. Now we have three different methods, two read methods and one write method. This read method and this write method are for the network, so to speak. This is why it has a packet byte buffer right here. And it's very important that when you write stuff here, right, so we can see the first thing we do is write an integer, right? This is the size of how many ingredients we're reading in. And then we're looping through basically all of those ingredients, and then we're writing this ingredient into the buffer. And then last but not least, here we're basically saying, hey, write the item stack. This is the output right here. So this is what happens here. So we're first doing an integer, then all of the ingredients, and then the output. And this has to be exactly the same way, doing it in reverse right here. So you can see here we're reading an integer, which is of course the size of the actual ingredient list. And then here, as you can see, we're reading ingredients from this list, going through as many times as we've written in here. And then last but not least here, read item stack, we're reading the item stack at the very end, the output, and then creating our new recipe. So it's very important that those two match. Otherwise, outside of the dev environment, it's not going to work. So this is a real issue. Inside of the dev environment, if they don't match, it actually is going to work. But if you then export the mod, load it up in like CurseForge, then it's not going to work. So that's very important that you make sure that everything here matches correctly. And then the read method, this is the method that actually reads the JSON file itself. So you can see there's an output. There's a lot of helper methods as well in the shape recipe and in similar classes as well. We're getting an array called ingredients, and this is of size 2. So this is very important. In our case, we only have 2 inputs that we want to have. While we have 4 slots, we actually only have 2 input slots because one of them is going to be for the fuel and the other one is the result slot or the output slot. Therefore, we have 2 slots where we want this to be added. This is why we have 2 right here. So that's very important that if you have a different amount of stuff inside of your recipe that you want to read in, you have to change this. Right, so this is the serializer and the type. So in the serializer, we then just say serializer.instance, and that would be that as well. And that is the class almost done. We now need the matches method still. And this is, like I said, the most important one, because if this returns true, then we know, aha, a recipe is now present. And the idea is the following. Inside of our recipe items defaulted list right here, we have the items that were read in through the JSON file. And through this inventory, we have access to the inventory of the actual entity, the block entity. So what we're going to say is if the recipe items.getZero, for the first item we actually define, if that is the same as the following, as the inventory.getStack of the first slot, or the slot with index 1. Why is that the case? Well, remember, if we think back to our actual entity, we can look at this in the screen handler. The index 0 slot actually has is actually the fuel slot. So index 1 and 2 are the slots where we actually input something. So this is why in this case, we're saying, okay, the first recipe item that we're reading in should be the same with slot 1. If that is the case, then what we're going to do is we're going to return recipe items.get1. So this is the second item that we're reading in from the JSON file, .test, and then inventory.getStack from slot 2 this time. This is going to return true if any recipe that we have matches both of those different item stacks. For the sake of argument, I'm actually going to copy over the actual JSON file here already, mithril pickaxe from Blaster. So this is going to be the same idea. And you can see here, first of all, the type, right? And then we have a list of ingredients. The 0th index here is going to be the gold pickaxe, and then the item with index 1 is going to be the mithril ingot. Right, hopefully this was sort of understandable. The matches method is sort of the brain of the operations, same with a little bit of the serializer. So those are going to be the 2 things that you want to change a lot of stuff. If you have different ways of it basically working, those are the 2 places where this would need to change. So in our mod recipes class, we're just going to have a public static void register recipes method. There you go. And this will do 2 things. It's going to do registry.register, and this is going to register the not block, but what we're going to do is this is going to register the recipe serializer with a new identifier, of course. Once again, of course, tutorial mod.modID, and then the ID here is going to be the mithril blaster recipe.serializer.id. This just makes it a little bit easier. And then after the first parentheses here, again, we're going to do a mithril blaster recipe.serializer.instance. There you go. And then for, because it's a little bit easier, we're just going to duplicate this. This is going to be the recipe type. And this is going to be the type as well. So go, and then this is going to be type as well. And that should be pretty much all that we need to do right here. This now needs to be called, very importantly, of course, below here, so mod recipes.register recipes. And now our recipes are registered. Now, in this case, it actually won't work because we haven't done anything with them yet. So we actually still need to implement them inside of the entity. So this is what we're going to do next. So inside of the actual block entity right here, let's just close everything. And this is going to change quite a bit. So the first thing that we're going to add is we're going to add a property delegate. Now, this is the idea of progress, some fuel time, things like that. This is done with a property delegate. Once again, I'm going to copy it over and I'm going to explain. So you see, we could, in theory, right, well, why don't we just add, the progress and stuff like that in here as normal fields, and then we're going to be fine. Well, that actually doesn't work because then it will not be synchronized with the server and the client. And this is why we need the property delegate. The property delegate, in just a little bit, is basically just going to take care of all of the synchronization for us. We don't need to worry about it at all, but we do need it. So this is still something we do. Right, this is going to be initialized here in the constructor. So once again, I will copy it over. This will look like much, but it actually isn't too crazy. So if you take a look at this, it actually isn't too crazy. You see, we just have a new property delegate right here and overriding the get, the set, and the size method. Size method should be fairly self-explanatory. We have 4 different variables that we want to, well, sort of delegate in quote unquotes, right? This is why this is size 4. We just have a switch statement with the 4 different variables that are being returned or being set in this value. So that is pretty much all that you really need to know about this. It is not that crazy. If you want to add another variable that should be, synchronized properly, you just add it as well, and that should be fairly straightforward. Now, to make sure that this is all saved correctly, we also want to add stuff to the write and the read method. So you can see we're basically writing in the progress, the fuel time, and the max fuel time, and then we're reading it out as well. When we leave the world, right, that the inventory is saved, the progress, the fuel time, and the max fuel time is also saved, just in case. Right, so I will copy over everything here. Like everything, of course, all of this is available in the description below, GitHub repository and individual gist as well. And if we copy this over, everything from the consume fuel method right here all the way to the bottom, we should not get any errors at all, actually. And we'll just take a look at the tick method first of all, because that is the most important, or let's say the brains of the operation once again. So let's see. So the tick method here, as you can see, does a few more things now. First of all, it says, hey, if this entity is consuming fuel, then we'll just decrease the fuel time. Shouldn't be any craziness, right? When we look at this, the fuel time is just how long does this actual fuel still have to burn. We're basically decreasing this as long as we're consuming fuel. Now we can also middle mouse button click on this and we can see, well, as long as the fuel time is bigger than 0, we're basically decreasing it until it reaches 0. That's pretty much all that we're doing here. So that's pretty good. Then next thing, if the entity has a recipe, once again, let's take a look at this method. This is a little more complicated than before, but overall also shouldn't be too crazy. The first thing we're going to say is, hey, is an actual recipe present of type Mithril Blaster recipe? This is all that we're asking. So if the matches method matches in this case, then this is true. In insert amount into output slot, let's take a look at this. We're just saying, once again, we're basically getting the max count of the output and saying, hey, can I actually still add 1 to it or not? If we can't do that, then we're basically putting in a false. If we can do that, then it's a 0. Same with this method, where we basically just say, hey, is the output slot either empty or is it the same item that we're about to put in there? Because otherwise it would just be overridden, and of course that's not what we want. So those are those 3 methods, right? If there's fuel in the slot right here and we're not consuming it at the moment, then we're going to start consuming it. So this is just the consume fuel method. You can see right here, we're just basically getting the fuel time, right? We're setting the fuel time to the actual time of the stack that is in there, and then we're setting the max fuel time to the fuel time as well, and then it starts decreasing. So the max fuel time, let's just say if we put in coal, for example, max fuel time should be 1600, and then fuel time should start off as 1600 as well, but every tick it's going to get decreased by 1, because at that point we're consuming fuel. And then if we are consuming fuel right here, you can see we're increasing the progress by 1, and then if the progress is bigger than max progress, then we're crafting the item. At the end of this, we're resetting the progress right here. So this should just be a method right here where we just reset the progress to 0 so that the progress is reset again. Should be fairly self-explanatory. This happens as soon as we don't have any recipe here. As soon as you basically take something out of the recipe, then it basically resets the progress. Right, so this is really great. This is already all of the, well, sort of functionality of the entity explained, but we still need to change stuff in both the screen handler and the screen as well. Let's start with the screen handler. The screen handler, what we actually want to do is inside of here, in the create menu method, we actually want to also pass in the property delegate. So we're going to say this.property delegate right here. Of course, we're going to get an error because the Blaster screen handler doesn't know what to do with it, but no worries. We can actually fix that fairly easily. What we just do is right here, we're just going to say property delegate. We're just going to call this delegate. There you go. I'm just going to reformat this a little bit. There you go. And then we also want to add this as a field. So private final property delegate or property delegate. And then here, what we want to do is after this, we want to say this.property delegate equals delegate. And then last but not least, right here, we're going to make a new area property delegate with size 4. And that should fix all of the errors here. And then very important, the very bottom here, we want to say add properties and then pass in the delegate. Right, so this is the delegate. This is basically the synchronization that's currently being done, right? So the delegate, like I said, it's going to synchronize with the client and the server because the screen that we're going to modify in just a moment is only client. So this is only client side. Therefore, we need to somehow synchronize it. And this is all done by doing this add properties here, just synchronizes it. And now we'll have 4 methods that I basically made myself so that we can check certain things in the screen, because so we have that in is crafting, has fuel, gets scaled progress, and gets scaled fuel progress. So this is just a bunch of maths basically that will make the arrow move from left to right, roughly speaking, right? So it's going to get the scaled progress. How far along in percentage are we from basically no progress to 100%? And then the scaled fuel progress, pretty much the same thing, just a little bit switched around basically, where we start at 100% and we're just decreasing it. So this is the general idea of this, this genuinely is just a bunch of math, right? It might look pretty crazy, but it's really just a bunch of math. So there should be no worries at all. And we're having those methods right here because we can access them in the screen via the handler. So this is going to be now the screen. And once again, I will copy over the two things that we need in the draw background method. Now, this is not too crazy. So you can see we're asking, hey, are we crafting? And this is, of course, that moment when we start making progress. So then we want to draw a texture at the position 84, 22. And it should be started at 176 and 14. Now, those numbers, right, with the draw texture, that is always something that a lot of people are like, what the frick does that mean? I don't know. I don't understand anything here. Okay, let's take a look at the GUI and let's see if we can figure this out. So if I open the GUI, once again, at the very top left corner of this image, it's 0, 0. That should be fairly self-explanatory. So let's think about this. It's crafting, right? And we're drawing a texture. Now we're drawing this at 84x and 22y. Now I know that this is at 84x and 22y is right here. So we start drawing our image right here. And you can see if we look at, so this is where the drawing of the image starts. Now, if we think about what are those? Well, this is basically where we take this image from. So what are we drawing? Well, we're drawing something from 147 and then 14 right here. So we're taking this arrow right here, right? And we're drawing it right here. But of course, we don't want to draw the entire arrow immediately. But what we want to do is we want to get the scale progress and we want to increase the x coordinate of what we're drawing with the actual progress. So this is what's happening. This can be very complicated if you're just looking at it. And let's not even take a look at the craziness of the fuel progress. I've literally just taken this from the furnace. So, I also am like a little bit, what the frick is going on here? Because this is pretty crazy. But yeah, this one is should be not too crazy. This and this is just where it starts being drawn. This X and this Y is just the width and the height of the image that is being drawn. And then these two are where's this image taken from, or this texture. That is pretty much all that there is to it. And this actually is also everything that we need to do to add this custom recipe as well. So this is all of the things that we need to do. This can sometimes be a little bit complicated, I understand, but I highly recommend just playing around with this a little bit and, thinking about it for a little while, and then hopefully you should be able to figure this out as well. And otherwise, everything else has been done. No more errors should be present. So let's just see if our custom recipe now works in the game. All right, we find ourselves back in Minecraft. So let's see if we can do this. Now let's actually get some golden pickaxes because that's the other thing that we need. Let's just get a few of them, right? And there you go. And let's set it in there. And there we go. We get both the progress as well as the burn progress right here. Now this will work with any type of fuel, even fuels from other mods, because we're using the fuel stuff. This should work. And if I actually add another one, this should not do anything. I have to actually take this out and then it's going to craft the next item. So there you go. Everything working beautifully. So like I said, this is just like the actual block entities itself, quite complex and can get very complex very quickly. This is why a foundation of Java is absolutely necessary at this point. There is no way around it. If you don't understand Java, you're going to be so incredibly lost that it's not even going to be a thing. So I cannot recommend it enough that, some Java knowledge here is absolutely required at this point, but then you can basically make any block entity that you want. It's really freaking awesome, really freaking cool. And yeah, this is pretty much how easy it is to add some custom recipe serialization to Minecraft. Right, a tiny addendum here that is quite important. If you try to use the mod right now on a server, it would actually not work. This is a bug that was discovered by DMC Pax on my Discord server. Thank you so much for actually discovering it. So there is an issue in the mod screen handlers, this one right here, because what we need to do is we need to do the same thing that we've basically done for the block entities. So if we actually just take a quick look here in the block entities, this one right here, where we have this register method, this is the same thing that we need to do here as well. So we're just going to say public static void register all screen handlers. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to copy this one right here into here. And then instead of, assigning it, we're just going to leave it blank or, null in this case. And this register all screen handlers method is then going to be called in the tutorial mod class right here. So we're just going to say mod screen handlers register all screen handlers. So that's fine. That's good. So this is the mod screen handlers issue. And there's another issue, which I actually also didn't find, that is in the matches method. I'm not 100% sure why that is the case. I've not really seen this before, but fair enough. So what we basically want to say is that if the world is in client, what we're just going to do is we're just going to return false right here, because for whatever reason on the client, the recipe items is not actually populated in that case. As I've said, I'm not 100% sure why that is the case or why we need it. I have not come across this. Maybe it's just something I've missed, but after having added both of those things, then now when you build your actual jar file, put it on a server, it should all work, hopefully. Right, and this concludes this tutorial as well. I hope you found this useful and you learned something new. If you did, I would very much appreciate a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more tutorials just like this one. I also want to thank all of my lovely Patreon supporters for supporting me and this channel. It is very much appreciated, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. So, yeah.